Chris, go ahead.
All right. Well, hello everyone again. Thank you for joining us. And tonight's town hall is going to be on climate and energy policy. And as everyone who knows her knows, the fight against the climate crisis is one of Sue's focus areas and one of the areas she really wants to lead to some real change. And today we are lucky enough to be joined by Dan Weeks. He is the Director of Marketing at Revision Energy, a local and high quality solar panel installation company active since 2003. And Sue, as you know, is mayor and Lebanon City Councilor, but she has also led being part of the team moving Lebanon to a sustainable and clean energy future. So tonight they're going to talk about what is being done with regards to clean energy locally and in New Hampshire and what work remains. So with that, I give the floor to Sue.
Great, thanks so much, Kristen. As I welcome Dan here tonight, I'd like to just tell you a little bit more about Dan. I've been fortunate enough to get to know Dan a little bit through our mutual friend, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. So we were, I think, starting this time last year, we were working the campaign trail here in New Hampshire. But Dan has, he's done a lot of work in New Hampshire, and I just want to share with you all that on top of Chris's introduction, that Dan is a clean energy advocate, an entrepreneur on a mission to transition New England from fossil fuels to renewable energy. As a co-owner and director of Revision Energy, Dan leads project and policy development for the region's largest clean energy company and works with impact investors to fund low-income solar. He has been named one of New Hampshire's most influential business leaders by New Hampshire Business Review and Young Professional of the Year by Stay, Work, and Play New Hampshire. And that's actually another place, and one of the reasons I wanted Dan to join us tonight. Another place that I met Dan is as a Lebanon City Councilor, working on the project and entering into a partnership with Revision Energy as part of our, as one of our overall, overarching goals here in the city to move to renewable energy, to be making our own power. Being a generator of this. Dan and Revision Energy have been part of that, and I think it's a really important conversation. But as we get started, I just want to back up a little bit and sort of put this all in perspective. That if I think back, if we'd had this conversation, Dan, in January, even late December, and you said to me, Sue, what's the number one crisis? Like, what are you worried about? I'd say climate change. Okay, and then we moved through January, and I'm starting to watch the news, and my background in public health preparedness and thinking about pandemics and some of that work I did, I'm watching this coronavirus, this novel coronavirus, and thinking, ooh, that might be what we've been preparing for all of this time. And it turns out it becomes a major public health crisis. So we have climate, we have this public health crisis with corona, or as I call it, COVID-19, which brings upon an economic crisis, some of which has been felt immediately, some of which will be felt in time to come. And that was actually the focus of last week's discussion, last week's town hall. And then on top of all of this, and very importantly, we have a racial justice crisis that's happening in our country. So these are multiple crises overlapping, all with significance today and into the future. So it's often hard, Dan, to talk about one without linking them to the other. So you can't. As we go through this conversation, I think both Dan and I are mindful of this, but things have changed so quickly, and we're dealing with this on so many fronts. Any thoughts on that, Dan?
Thank you so much, Sue, for starting there. It does resonate very much with me, and let me just first say it's an honor to join you tonight. I thank you for your years of public service on behalf of the good folks of Lebanon, a city that I love. I do live down and grew up in the Monadnock area of New Hampshire, live in Nashua now with my wife and 3 kids, but love coming up to the Upper Valley very, very often, and appreciate how the city of Lebanon has been a leader across the state in terms of showing the way to the clean energy transition. And I know thanks in large part to your leadership there in Lebanon. So thank you for all that you've done in your service and now stepping up to run for state senate to bring those good ideas to Concord. And I'll just mention here, I'm not floating in the air above the city of Lebanon, but this is a project that we were honored to install not that long ago for Mascoma Meadows, a resident-owned community, mobile home community there, which I'm sure a bunch of viewers tonight are familiar with, right there in Lebanon on your way into Enfield. And this is a nice example of the kind of project that we are particularly passionate about, making solar accessible to folks who need it most, who have the toughest time affording their electric bills. So this array provides power to the entire community and saves all the residents hundreds of dollars a year. But to your question, Sue, I think it's a really good way to lead into this conversation around these overlapping crises and where the particular topic of tonight's discussion, the climate crisis, fits in. I think they are much more related than many of us know, and we will realize this more and more in time. In one sense, and you've worked in emergency response and in healthcare for years, so you get how, you know, a crisis demands immediate response, and yet if we only focus on the narrow crisis, chances are a lot more harm will come. And the public health dimension that is so obvious in COVID-19, but is often not so obvious when we talk about the climate crisis or economic struggle, poverty, inequality, I think really bears mention. So I happen to be married to an amazing woman born and raised in Soweto, South Africa, one of the black townships, and raised under apartheid. It was illegal for a person with the color of her skin color to vote, to have a good education, on and on, a history that we're familiar with in this country. One of the consequences of being black in South Africa, and also very often in this country, is that one is much more likely to live in close proximity to the sources of climate pollution, the most potent sources, which are power plants burning fossil fuels, and freeways where a lot of our car and truck traffic goes, which also spew carbon pollution out of their tailpipes. The fine particulate matter that people breathe in, particularly in a cumulative manner when they live in close proximity to these emissions, and that causes a much higher instance of respiratory ailments, the most common being asthma, where a young black child in America is multiple times more likely to suffer and even to die prematurely from asthma and other respiratory ailments. It happens that my wife also has a respiratory condition, part of the asthma family. And so we're high risk, as are so many other people. But that, when we have then looked at the way in which COVID-19 has taken tragically over 170,000 American lives, we know that the rate of mortality is much higher for people with respiratory ailments or similar pre-existing conditions. We've lost a lot of our older citizens, grandparents and parents, but also a lot of younger people, and in particular, in a very disproportionate way, people of color, even here in New Hampshire, 2 to 3 times the rate of mortality. And that is a very direct connection. There's the kind of broader connection in that the one crisis, which is very immediate, is in many ways a dress rehearsal for the slow-moving crisis that is COVID-19. But there is this direct connection in the area of our human health. And when we look at climate change, I think about the moose, which I grew up loving and which are disappearing fast. I think about maple syrup, which is also moving north because this warming climate can't support the healthy growth and proliferation of maple trees. There's a gradual shift north. But ultimately, it comes down to our ability to be healthy. And the more we put in terms of fine particulate matter from the burning of fossil fuels into the air, the more people die prematurely, and the more we spend collectively. An estimate in this country of $649 billion a year. That would be per capita in New Hampshire, for the state of New Hampshire, about $2.5 billion just to deal with the health dimensions of the climate crisis. So I'll leave it at that, but I so appreciate you connecting these two because they are much more connected than we generally read about in the news. And if we're concerned with preserving human life in this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, we absolutely need to be concerned about this slower moving crisis that is the climate crisis and the pollution from our burning of fossil fuels that is causing it.
Thank you. It continues to strike me, the social determinants of health, the places that, they are predictors. And, as we move into this discussion, which may feel like, crisis is more of a climate crisis might be more slow moving, and public health crisis is, so immediate because it's touching every part of our lives right now. I can't help but think all the time that if we were very deliberate about, housing and healthcare, deliberate and fair, just two different areas, that how much money, not that it should always come to this, but how much money are we going to save that we can make other strategic investments? And with those strategic investments, change equality, bring equity across the board in so many different areas. So these are I don't know what keeps you up at night besides small children.
You're hearing some of them here. Sorry about that.
No, I love it. I think it's great. As we all, I say to Dan earlier, as we're all now having these conversations from our homes, children, family members, dogs, they're all welcome partners in this. But I just wanted to bring that up, that the equity, across the board, investments matter in changing that, or turning that tide, righting that ship. So we're going to need to be very deliberate about this as policymakers in New Hampshire, and certainly on the national level. So this is
just on that point about investments, smart versus dumb investments. As a share of GDP, and we've got the world's largest GDP, we spend roughly 17% on healthcare, and really it's predominantly on sick care. It's not the kind of preventive smart investments. That is close to double what most other advanced industrialized countries spend, more in the region of 9% of their smaller GDPs. And a big reason for that is because we are leading the way in terms of the pollution that creates these chronic health conditions that require continuous care over a lifetime. But we can spend our money a lot better and achieve better human health if we can be more forward thinking and make these smart investments to deal with the climate crisis, not to mention respecting science and doing what the scientists have been telling us during this pandemic, which has cost almost a quarter of world deaths are right here in the United States, 5% of the world population. It's a real tragedy.
The silver lining in all of this is that we have an opportunity here now to, it feels sometimes to me, Dan, like even with these multiple crises, that the world has stopped in a certain way from a policy perspective. And we can think about, people like to use the word reimagine, but it's true. Like, what do you really want this to look like? And is now the time that we can get this done? I actually think that it is. And that we would be foolish to waste these opportunities. So I think about this as well all the time. So as policymakers moving forward, we have an opportunity here to jumpstart these conversations and really reimagine and take these linkages and invest in them appropriately. So we can, it's the health and well-being of our communities, and we can build here in New Hampshire. What's important to me is a prosperous and inclusive New Hampshire. Anything from climate to education, workforce development, there's all of this is going to be connected in. But with these crises, we should, as we manage them, the opportunities are there for us to take this in a different direction. Pretty clear. So let's talk about some of the directions that we're already at, and then we can end on the note and take some questions about where we're going to go, what our opportunities are and where we could go. So I like to always start the conversation in talking about climate. Certainly we've talked about the injustice, and what I know you and I squarely agree on is that we are looking at a time when the reduction of fossil fuels is more important now than ever. Like, this just needs to go down. down, down, down. And as that's going down, what's coming up is, or I call forward facing to renewable energy sources. And these are sources that have been available to us. It's how we harness this energy and we use it in our communities. I look at the fight against climate change and being really a two-pronged approach. And I am, again, one of the places we met is kind of in this local approach here in the city of Lebanon. So it's unleashing the power of community government. And I think we've been good about that in New Hampshire and giving local municipalities the tools to do things like community solar, community power, providing for tax incentives. Let's talk about it, or exemptions. So tax incentives, which include exemptions for those that are taking advantage or moving forward with renewables. So Revision Energy Partnership, City of Lebanon, I look at this as just one of the pieces of a community power initiative, which in the state of New Hampshire, Lebanon, although we have not completely turned this on, and I know a number of other communities are really interested in this, we are considered one of the leaders, and we're close to being there. This is the place where, this, we're going to choose almost like having our own renewable portfolio. Like, what do we want to use for energy? How are we going to harness this? And how are we going to power our own community? So Revision is part of that. The solar arrays that we've recently put on our municipal buildings is part of that unleashing of this local power. Talk a little bit with me about the conversation with Lebanon, the work that's being done, and can you relate that to some of the other communities that I know in Hanover, right next door, our good friends in Hanover, and then down in Claremont and Sullivan County, some different experiences that you've had and why this is important in our, in our community power projects.
Thank you, Sue. It is really exciting what we're seeing at the local level, with Lebanon being right out front, but communities throughout the state wanting to show that leadership, demonstrate that it's possible, and hopefully inspire the entire state to do likewise. And boy, is that important now when, sad to say, we have a governor who has vetoed, among his 50 plus vetoes, has been a number of bipartisan bills to enable more clean energy deployment. So I'd love to talk to the Lebanon example. Just at a high level, it's worth noting as a benchmark. Obviously, Upper Valley sits right on the Connecticut River, bordering Vermont. In the state of Vermont, about 14% of the state's electricity now comes from the sun. Massachusetts is right about the same, 14, 15%. Maine is moving forward very rapidly from a very low baseline of 0.5% last year. They're now over 1%, and they have applications to go well beyond that 20, 25% and beyond. The key delta between those states and New Hampshire is policy. New Hampshire is at 0.77% solar penetration, and that is beyond the goal that we have set as a state. Our renewable portfolio standard, which is the which we determine what our goal is for clean energy deployment, not just solar, but wind and others, only calls for 0.7% all the way out through 2030. So talk about being a laggard when our neighbors are at 14% and going swiftly forward. That's, I think, frankly embarrassing. Lebanon is the way. So I should just note that Revision Energy as a company is obviously diverse. We're an employee-owned benefit corporation, and as a company, of course, we don't endorse candidates but we were very honored to work with the city after going through an extensive competitive bid process and RFP, and then had the honor, and this was in 2018 to 2019 as the process went through the selection and vetting, we then had the honor to install solar on 7 of your municipal buildings, including a larger ground-mounted array, bigger than the one you see behind me at Mascoma Meadows, which powers your wastewater treatment plant. So residents driving through town have probably noticed a number of the public works buildings, the fire station, the library, Kilton Library, are among the portfolio of 7 initial projects. And your fellow councilor, Clifton Bilo, a former PUC commissioner and state senator, is truly a force to be reckoned with when it comes to innovating and providing leadership on clean energy over many years. And thanks in part to his leadership, the community power program, where Lebanon is helping to lead the way. Something I know you've been involved in, Sue, from your time as mayor, getting some of these projects, not just solar, but other renewable energy projects moving. But this is a really exciting opportunity, as you say, to create on a community-wide level a portfolio of clean generating assets. These can be solar, they can also be wind, they can be biomass if you choose, or methane gas, taking waste from a landfill, for instance, generating clean electricity that way. You create your right in almost like you serving your residents, where you take the place of providing default supply. Residents can always opt out and purchase their electricity from another supplier. That's a right that we have as citizens. But you would instead be providing as default supply for anybody who didn't choose otherwise, a clean mix of local generating assets, distributed generation, which in the process would do two really exciting things in my view. Three. The one, of course, we're talking about climate here. It would contribute to the significant reduction of carbon pollution, of carbon emissions from fossil fuel generation. Number two, it would reduce cost for ratepayers. I often say that I'm blessed to be in an industry where the fuel source is free. Sunlight just shines down on us. In fact, there's enough sunlight hitting the surface of the earth in 1 hour to, if we harnessed it all, to meet human needs for a year. That's how incredibly abundant the solar resource is. And thanks to reductions in the cost of the technology, solar panels, the ability to efficiently harness that power as panels become more and more efficient with each passing year, the cost of that generation is less than the fossil fuel alternative. So we would save ratepayers money throughout a given community. And thirdly, and I think you were starting to get to this a minute ago, the economic impacts. Distributed local generation adds a lot of jobs. Currently in New Hampshire, there's about 17,000 people working in the clean energy space, both clean generation like solar, but also energy efficiency. In our neighboring states, that number is, in the state of Massachusetts, into the hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands in Vermont and Maine, moving swiftly forward at a time when we have tens of thousands of granted staters out of work, many of whom have grown accustomed to not much better than minimum wage jobs, $7, $8, $10, maybe $12 an hour. These clean energy jobs pay double the median wage in New Hampshire. You know, we're talking 50, 60,000 and beyond. Good family wage. Great if you went to college, but you don't have to. Many of our co-owners at Revision Energy are in the trades. A lot of them have been to college, but they want to work with their hands, so they're becoming or have become electricians. But even if you just went to technical school or graduated from a technical high school, you've got a good on-ramp to being part of this transition. And as we look about setting the goals that I trust you as state senator will be part of bringing statewide, we are talking tens of thousands of jobs in New Hampshire, good family wage jobs that will make this transition happen. So lower cost, a lot more jobs in local investment, affording that high cost of housing in the Upper Valley. I know that's another challenge that you're working on. And then, of course, preserving the very habitability of this one and only planet.
So there's a couple of things that that come to mind that I want to make sure I don't forget to talk about. So methane gas reclamation. Who would ever think that you could take well, the dump, when I was growing up, we called it the dump. It is now the landfill. But the landfill, you can take that greenhouse gas that is so unpleasant and actually turn that, into energy. I mean, this is why we call it renewable. These things, they seem so obvious once you, like just even lightly venture into it, you can understand what the benefit is. So I know that there's only a handful of landfills in the state that are doing this kind of work or even thinking about doing this kind of work. But this is, as long as I've been on the council and we've been pursuing this, and it is more real now than ever, because as you know, one of the things that the city of Lebanon did was stand up and hire somebody. We call him an energy and facilities manager, Tad Montgomery, but really we brought him in because we came to realize working with Cliff Below, and I happened to be mayor at that time, that we were losing out on all these opportunities. We were simple things like, the windows that we bought for our especially our older buildings. When we were pricing out what was less expensive, but not thinking about the life cycle costs and the efficiency that that would bring us in terms of energy over time. We were able to identify a number of areas that said the return on investment here and the return to the environment and in the fight against climate change, it all just made sense to us. So we made a serious move forward in bringing Tad on because, as a city, as a council and as a city, we're committed to this. So I wanted to just touch on that for a second. Secondly, from the local perspective, when Donald Trump backed out of the Paris Climate Accord, we were one of the first cities, and actually that's when I met Mayor Donchis. We signed on as a city, read it into the record, and agreed that we wanted to reduce the greenhouse gases, that we were going to, it lines up with our master plan, and that we were going to be there at the table with other mayors, not just in the state of New Hampshire, but throughout the United States, and really acting locally. And that's brought us to this place where that where we are right now. So, and honestly, and into the future. So there's just some of the important projects, one that we've worked on locally. I wanted to mention one other item that some residents or area residents might not be aware of, but New Hampshire law allows for communities to adopt incentives. And we, in 2013, adopted an incentive so that if you put a solar system on your house in the city of Lebanon, the value, you're not assessed for your taxes are not assessed on the value of that solar system. That's an incentive to do it. I think it's smart. It's the right thing to do. It's a tool that the state has given us, and one that we took advantage of. And I've noted that a number of other communities have in different ways. So I don't know if you have any insight into that and some of the incentives, but I'd surely love to hear about it. I'm sure everybody would.
Thank you, Sue. And I do see a question from Jean regarding participating, even if you live on, in Jean's case, a very wooded lot in Enfield.
Hi, Jean.
I know how that goes. I grew up in the woods in Temple, and we've still got plenty of trees around my house. Not so many that we can't get decent solar generation. So we do obviously have solar on my roof to power our electric cars and our electric heat pumps. But to your point, Sue, and then I'd love to answer your question, Jean. So we do have, unfortunately, it's rather a patchwork. So we're always thrilled when a homeowner comes to us or a nonprofit. We've been honored to work with the Listen Center, with the Claremont Soup Kitchen, with a number of, obviously, Mascoma Meadows there behind me, with some great organizations in Hanover, including 20 plus rooftops on Dartmouth campus. So we're always thrilled when someone from your community comes to us, because we know they're not going to have a penalty for going solar in the form of higher taxes. However, a number of communities, about 150 towns in New Hampshire and cities, don't have such exemptions. And some of them have a very partial exemption where the first $5,000 of the expense is exempted, but an array can easily cost $20,000. So you're paying most of the additional value in taxes, for example. Thus, we take our hat off to Lebanon and Hanover as well. But unfortunately, it makes it much more challenging. A company like mine is fortunate after 17 years to be fairly established. And so we have staff whose job it is to go through that individual permitting process with any one of the 230 odd New Hampshire towns and deal with the specific requirements around permitting, around zones that are sometimes out of bounds for solar, historic districts and things like that. And then helping the homeowner work through the different tax implications. What a lot of other states have done, and what we would humbly recommend to New Hampshire, to the Senate and House, would be something that in the state of California is called a solar bill of rights, where there are, for one, a town may not apply a a blanket restriction without any opportunity for appeal or for exemptions to solar in their community. That doesn't mean that any project that's proposed is approved, but it means that folks aren't automatically excluded. And a number of states, including New England states and California, have statewide property tax exemptions. The basic idea being that this is something which is providing a net good to society as well as helping the homeowner save money. So let's not penalize that activity by increasing their taxes. And Lord knows property taxes in New Hampshire are very high. So those are some examples where taking the best practices from a city like Lebanon to Concord, streamlining, getting rid of some red tape that makes it harder, particularly for the smaller solar companies. We're proud to be one of a couple dozen companies doing business in New Hampshire. A lot of them are really small, and we want to see them continue to thrive. We do better in a healthy ecosystem where consumers have choice, where companies have some healthy competition. And it's been really hard, particularly during COVID-19, for some of the smaller companies to stay afloat. Removing some of these barriers would really help and, of course, lead to greater job growth. And I can maybe briefly speak to Jean's question,
Sure.
if that's okay. So you're alluding to the possibility for a community solar farm in which homeowners who just don't have the roof conditions to install on their own roof, or renters who don't own their roof in the first place, a way that they can participate in the transition. Good news and bad news. Good news is the pathway is clearly there. We've done these community solar farms, a number of them in the state of Maine. We've seen a lot of them happen in Massachusetts and in Vermont. The regulations in New Hampshire, getting back to what the Senate has tried to do, but often faced vetoes from the governor, have made that quite difficult. And to boil it down as simply as I can, it's because the utilities take much of the value of solar when it is delivered to the grid as opposed to used within a home or business or nonprofit. When you net meter it, you lose much of its value as compared to the retail rate of electricity that you pay at your home. So the array exports its power, the utility sells that power for as much as twice or even more what it pays the generator, the owner of the solar array. It then sells that power to nearby homes for as much as twice the cost. And so that means that as a participant in a community solar farm, you're having to pay that 17 cents per kilowatt hour on your home bill, and you're only getting paid 7 cents on the generation from that solar farm. So that's a challenge. And other states have gone through a evidence-based process at their public utilities commissions to determine what the actual value of solar generation is to the grid, incorporating the costs of maintaining the grid, because every solar array should contribute to the upkeep of the grid as a connected system. But they've arrived at numbers way above that 7 cent. In the state of Maine, they've arrived at 14 cents per kilowatt hour. Massachusetts as high as 21 cents. So if and when New Hampshire takes some of these steps, applies some of these best practices, Jean, the answer is we will have community solar farms pop up everywhere. In the meantime, we are trying hard to make the first community solar farms happen. And so I would invite you to reach out if you'd like to Revision Energy through our website, or just pop in the office there in Enfield on Main Street. And we'd love to at least take down your name. And as these projects begin to go online, would welcome your and other folks participating.
Great. Now, as you've noticed, I'm starting to save energy at my own house tonight. I feel like I'm always in this dark cave. I can never get the lighting quite right. So we're working on some energy efficiency here in
There you go, walk the talk.
West Lebanon tonight. So let's kind of transition away from, and we've touched on parts of it, some of the local work that again, I love to call it unleashing the power of local government to get this work done. And I'm so proud of my own community, but you've mentioned others, and you can read about them. There are other communities in New Hampshire that are moving deliberately in the same direction, and it's inspiring, and I want to support that in any way I can. But I also want to support an overarching an overarching policy that's adopted by the legislature that still allows for this local work to happen, but takes a number of the different initiatives and brings them all under one umbrella. And I think that this starts with there's a climate action plan from 2007 that was worked on, that was adopted, but it isn't, and I'm not diminishing its value because it's kind of set the stage for these conversations, but it's not a legislative plan. It is, it says, let's, work on reducing greenhouse gases. I think it's by 80% below the 1990 rate. Now, all the numbers, is it 2040, is it 2050, is it 2030? I wrote myself a note. Oh, that is okay. This is 2050. So it's there. It's a goal. But it also speaks to some of the other initiatives that are being talked about, in campaigns in this state, as well as we're a regional outlier. You've already mentioned that. We're seeing being legislated in states like Maine. So, green jobs, talking about transportation, talking about housing, how we build our homes, how we build not only, commercial buildings, but the municipal buildings that we do our business in, because that's where we have a lot of control over that. So I'm interested in thinking a little bit bigger here and wanting to engage you in this dialogue. And what does an overarching legislative policy look like for the state of New Hampshire? And I want to launch into it in a couple of different ways. One of which is, talking about building and green jobs. One is talking about transportation. I think that is a significant missed opportunity for us, especially we're not part of the Transportation Climate Initiative. We're in the Northeast region, and how valuable that would be to us, considering the damage that emissions from motor vehicles do to us every day. I'm super interested in what's happening over in the state of Maine with their they've linked climate justice and economic justice in a really comprehensive package, which I can talk about a little bit more in a few minutes because I'm pretty passionate about this. So I want to start off and say, all right, we have a climate action plan. We have a goal. We have an opportunity here now, though, to pull all of these pieces together and put them under one, at least I think, overarching legislative policy. You might not agree, but I'd be interested in what you have to say about this. So let's go.
Let's go, Sue. This certainly excites me very much. Long before I joined the industry, as a high schooler at Conval High School, I was on a solar car team in the 90s when solar was still kind of on the margins, needless to say, but have been passionate about the science and the solutions long before making it my daily job. So I'm thrilled to have this conversation, and I think it's absolutely right that we need a comprehensive strategy coming from the state. By no means getting in the way of the kind of leadership that communities are showing, but turbocharging it, which is what we desperately need if we're going to have any chance of meeting the clearly articulated, scientifically informed goals of preserving the very habitability of this planet. So I think you touched on the key components, the pillars of such a plan. We've got to clean up the grid, which is to say we've got to deliver clean power to the grid. And we've talked about some of the key drivers of that. We've talked about solar in particular, but wind is another very abundant resource we have, particularly offshore wind, where according to research done by the Department of Energy, we could generate enough energy to meet all the energy needs, not just the current electric needs, but our heating, cooling, transportation needs as well in all 6 New England states times 10. That's how abundant the wind resource is off the Gulf of Maine if we were to put turbines up offshore, as much as 50 miles offshore. So that's another hugely abundant resource, which is becoming cheaper every year. So we've got to replace fossil fuel generation and other non-renewable generation of electrons with clean generation, number one. Then we've got to kind of boil it down, like crazy. We've got to electrify everything we possibly can. So, we now have the technologies to get from A to B, hundreds of miles of range on electric vehicles. And they're coming not just to small cars like my Chevy Volt. Our family of 5 now, we needed a minivan, and we got a Chrysler Pacifica, which is also a plug-in electric minivan with a hybrid motor if you need additional range. But it's actually coming to big trucks as well, 18-wheelers,
Love it.
who consume huge amounts of diesel and are the cause of huge amounts of carbon pollution. So transportation is crucial. At the state level, we've actually got several $millions sitting in the kitty as part of the Volkswagen emission scandal settlement, which was dispersed to all the states. Most other states, at least in this region, have been spending that money very efficiently, getting fast chargers deployed on the major transportation corridors. You should be able to go from Lebanon to Concord and at least once, maybe even twice, stop off at a fast charger so that our friends in Burlington are going to come through New Hampshire, take a holiday here, and our friends in Quebec are going to do likewise instead of sticking to the neighboring states, which are building out their fast charging networks. When I drove up to Ottawa in my Chevy Bolt last summer, there was very little charging we could do in New Hampshire, but thank goodness we made it across the river into Vermont and we had plenty of options. Shame on New Hampshire for being way behind the curve, especially when we've got money coming from Volkswagen just sitting in the account for months and months and months. On the thermal side, and we can pick up some exciting leadership from our neighbors in Maine, which launched a campaign to deploy 100,000 heat pumps to low-income Mainers. That's the state that is most reliant of all 50 states on home heating oil, propane to heat homes, which is very polluting and can be very expensive. New Hampshire is number 2, and we have the technology to get all those homes off of that polluting oil, those furnaces in the basement, and onto clean mini split heat pumps. That's how we heat our entire home, an 1880s home. And that can be deployed throughout the state. Also electric, and about 2 to 3 times the efficiency of a conventional electric radiator. So having a plan which sets the goals of getting to 100% clean renewable energy, moving steadily, at least 50% by 2030, 70 or 80% by 2040, 100% by 2050 is eminently possible. And then tackling those other key polluting sectors, transportation, and our thermal needs, not just heating homes, but also the industrial needs, which have energy dense requirements where we need continued innovation, including in the area of storage through batteries. The template is there. That's kind of the grand strategy. We already have a lot of bills in Concord that would take us several steps down the road. A number of them have passed with bipartisan support, but met with vetoes. Others need more leadership in order to pass in the first place. So we can go into any of those further if you'd like, but I think you hit on the key pillars there.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Dan. I always want to go a little bit further, and I want to talk about transportation. So, I mentioned the Transportation Climate Initiative, and this pathway for these fast charging stations for folks who have hybrid vehicles to plan their trips. And they're going deliberately along routes, and those routes, there's this environmental benefit for us, and at the same time the economic benefit, not just for their own pocketbooks, but the communities that they're stopping in, where they might have a meal, they might enjoy a show, they might run their vacation around that. There's all of these other pieces of it that are interrelated that sometimes aren't included in the initial conversation. You just kind of sort of build it out. So I want to talk a little bit about say mass transportation and buses. So big conversation certainly here in the Upper Valley, but we just saw Sullivan County's having a conversation about a bus route that will bring folks from Claremont to Lebanon and Lebanon to Claremont access to healthcare so they can get to doctor's appointments. I call them people movers because it's about moving folks to jobs. So there's an economic benefit for the employers and for the employees. There's an infrastructure benefit because the less cars individually you have on the road is a benefit. It's like wearing out the carpet every time you walk over it. But then there's this strong environmental piece where driving the number of cars down and then focusing on the buses, but buses are going hybrid. So I'm on the Advanced Transit Board of Directors here in the Upper Valley. I've been the representative from the City Council there for a few years. And, when I went into it, I had so much to learn. And I was like, free buses. what a different, but we all support it, we all pay into it, and it's a benefit to all of us. And we're moving the buses to hybrid buses. So this is not just about what we're doing here. When I looked at Claremont, I'm going to be really interested to see what kind of buses that they are going to be moving back and forth. But I also see this network in other states that I travel to. So we have an opportunity to get all of those advantages and bring, Mack trucks, buses, our people movers. Any thoughts on that?
It's a very exciting area of innovation. Some recent data out of the city of Chicago finds that just the public health benefits in terms of dollars saved to the public, so public health expenditures from converting one city bus of the thousands they have from your old diesel or gas burning to fully electric, going even beyond hybrid. The savings in public health dollars, $50,000. And that's because of that fine particulate matter that comes out in abundance from those tailpipes and causes a lot of childhood asthma and other chronic health conditions that we all pay for, not to mention the human cost of your potential being limited because you're sick. So that's, I think, just a remarkable data point. And yes, New Hampshire isn't as dense as Chicago. So that carbon pollution is going a bit higher into the atmosphere, but is still doing the same long-term damage in terms of contributing to the greenhouse effect and the warming of our surfaces. But another example is school buses, and talk about, our kids in the future while we're having this conversation. There's one fun fact about school buses, which is they don't run in the summer, hardly ever. Which is also the time that our system experiences the highest demand for electricity, particularly late afternoon, evenings, when everybody's trying to cool their house down. Mm-hmm. Electric school buses can be literally moving power plants where you could harness those hundreds of kilowatt hours worth of battery in a given school bus to reduce system demand, something that actually Lebanon has been innovating on. As the first community to pilot real-time or time-of-use pricing, where the cost of electricity would vary based on the demand at a given time, which makes all the sense in the world. Mm-hmm. That is a fast track to getting individual homes deploying Tesla Powerwalls and other battery systems, as you guys are beginning to do in a collaboration with Liberty Utilities, which we salute. But you could take that to a much greater scale, given just the amount of battery potential in a school bus that sits most of the summer and can provide these grid services, reducing costs for all of us. So absolutely, I'm so glad that you're working on that. And public transit is a great need we have in our state. And so let's, if we can, there are monies becoming available for this. I think if there's a change in administration in Washington, Lord knows Vice President Biden is a big infrastructure guy who will put substantial funds into helping municipalities and other government entities deploy these clean technologies, save the public health costs. So a very exciting area, which we need to be leading on.
I think that so I talk about the examples in the Upper Valley or the Connecticut River Valley, but I think the opportunities to create interconnectivity throughout our state. And then I know there is a discussion about bringing rail into like the MBTA into the southern part of New Hampshire. Again, people movers, taking cars off the road, moving people. There's much more interoperability that I think we're going to be able to take advantage of. That, well, some of which we know about, some of which we're going to learn about. It's just, it's just broadening that conversation. So that opportunity, I think, is promising as well. The interoperability between these different bus systems is going to be part of our future, part of our clean future, the way that I see it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about just a little bit about Maine, and then kind of set you free on what you think some of the what of our opportunities are, and then I know you've mentioned some of the opposition that we've met, at the State House, opposition not in the legislature but in the governor's office, unfortunately, and some of the opposition that we meet on the federal level. But I talk about this frequently because I think that it is a smart model, and the Maine put forward a Green New Deal, and they linked economic climate justice and economic justice. And they also included in this a panel or a commission on inclusion and diversity to make sure that as they are building or putting new green. So part of this is green jobs. So inclusion and diversity tied to the green jobs that are available. I think it's exciting that we're talking about, or that Maine is talking about, workforce development with apprenticeship tracks, so that you can start to try this out in a trade school, or even in high school. Find your home, that place where you want to work, and have a track to a green job. And you talked about that these are good paying. I always call it putting the kind of jobs there where you can put dinner on the table. You can feed your family. So that's important to me. Bringing solar, any of their new schools, they're bringing solar to the schools. That's part of the plan. And wrapped all around this is they did this work in collaboration with labor, with the AFL-CIO. I can't think of a more comprehensive package, but I also haven't looked far outside of New England. I'm, born and raised, I was born and raised in Massachusetts, lived in Vermont, but I settled in New Hampshire in the early 90s while you were at Conval working on your model car projects, and getting your feet wet in solar. I was just moving here, but I trust that there are similar progressive initiatives that are happening. They're comprehensive and smart like this, and really cover a number of bases. So I wanted to kind of lean into that a little bit and hear what you think about Maine, and then let's just talk about opportunities and opposition. And I know we always run over because these conversations are so great. See if there's any more questions that we can take from folks.
Thank you, Sue. I think you summed it up pretty well. We could have a whole nother conversation on some of the templates that Maine and other states have provided. Not that we need to carbon copy them, but let's learn from their experience and apply what works for New Hampshire. In many ways, Maine has virtually the exact same population as New Hampshire, a similar distribution of urban and rural. So I think there are a lot of lessons there. I would summarize some of the earlier points that it starts with essentially declaring New Hampshire's open for business when it comes to clean energy in our future. We respect the science. We want to add the jobs. So let's set that RPS, that renewable portfolio, not at 0.7 solar or 1% wind. Let's set meaningful goals in line with the science, and then let the market respond as it is done in other states. You don't need tons and tons of top-down state money, but you do need a state goal, a policy framework that will enable that. So that's something that all of our neighboring states have done, and that it's, I think, high time New Hampshire does. If we are find ourselves with the same governor next year, we need to be able to actually overturn those vetoes. So strong majorities in the Senate and House will be crucial for that. On the workforce piece, just huge potential. We've talked about the tens of thousands of Granite Staters who are currently out of work, and a lot of them don't really want to return to an $8 an hour or $10 an hour service job or retail job. We are overrepresented in the retail space. As a no sales tax state, a lot of Massachusetts and Vermont come over to do their tax-free shopping, meaning, great, we got a lot of people having jobs there, but they're kind of dead-end jobs. There's not a lot of upward mobility opportunities when you're working retail. And so to the extent we can bring our young people and frankly attract more young people, we're a rapidly aging state, and we want to keep, I hope my kids choose to settle in New Hampshire, and I want to see a lot of other young millennials and Gen Xers and Yers and Z, whatever, moving to our state. And we know there's plenty of survey data saying that young workers want to work in a sector that they feel like is contributing to rather than causing harm to their society. Particular interest we see in the clean energy space. So tons of opportunity. The barriers, I think we've kind of come at them a couple times, but largely it's poor policy. It's the failure to enact the kinds of proven policy levers that will allow us to truly tackle the climate crisis. And that's why, to anybody listening, I trust you're already registered and planning to vote in the primary on September 8th and then in the general on November 3rd. But please bring every family member and friend along with you. And if you're not yet registered, do that. You can even do it at the polls or request an absentee ballot, which you can still do, although time is short, less than 2 weeks to go. So we've got to vote, and we've got to demand candidates do as you're doing, Sue, in your campaign for Senate, to not just say, okay, I'll support it, but to actually be innovators, to be following the science, to be implementing the best ideas in their communities, taking them statewide. And a component of that opposition is, unfortunately, the tremendous legacy influence that the incumbent fossil fuel players have. They receive over $20 billion a year in direct public subsidies to pollute our planet, and hundreds of billions when you look at the indirect costs, the negative externalities of the damage that their products cause. We need leaders with the courage and the independence to take us off of that 100-year subsidy addiction to fossil fuels, and allow us to make this transition. So it's campaign finance reform along with a clean energy and climate agenda. We need real democracy, which begins with every citizen out there voting and educating themselves and holding their elected leaders to account to make this happen.
Well, Dan, I believe now more than ever, as I said earlier on in the conversation, these linking crises and the opportunity the world hasn't stopped, and policy hasn't stopped, but we are able to really you're able to see things that you couldn't before, because part of our world has slowed down. You can only watch so much Netflix, and thank God for a good book, but it's giving us really the opportunity to look at what we should be doing. I've seen op-ed after op-ed. I mean, I appreciate folks putting their pen to paper and telling us all what they think. Like, this is an opportunity for you now. COVID has stopped us, to say, in the childcare and early education business. That has really changed. But hey, we're one of 5 states that doesn't have this, and it's impacting our workforce and our ability to go back to work. Now's the time to make that change. It's just one example. So I feel very strongly that there are, in one of the most uncertain times in our lives, there are more opportunities than less to make change. And these 4 crises, as we set up this conversation tonight, and actually independently came to this in this, as we were planning for it, when I think about this, we brought this together and said, here are these 4 crises. Here's how they're linked. And we've offered some solutions and ways that a state senator, a member of the House, as well as local city councilors, mayors, town managers, and then our most important asset are the people that we serve, getting up, getting on their feet, and telling us what they think, what they want to do, and voting. So I'm really pleased with the opportunity to talk tonight, to bring these linkages together. I think it's a great way to segue off into some questions if we have them. Is just the reminder Dan gave you all is really the best way to make these changes is to get to the ballot box. And we now, with COVID, I call it vote from home. Now the window is short, so you have to move on that quickly. But you have a primary coming up, you have a general, vote. Let's get this done. It's a veto proof plus some majority. That's how we're going to do it. Okay. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to see if there are any other. I know Jean Fay, our friend from Enfield, had some questions. Chris, do we have any in the Q&A that you want to bring forward?
Indeed, we do.
Oh, good.
So there's a really good one here by our friend Rob, who talks about how this year they got 34 solar panels put on their roof, and that is producing what they need to get through the year. But they want to know if there is a way to get New Hampshire to allow them to add another 10 or 15 so that they could be a producer. I think that's a good question for Dan.
Sure. Well, without getting into your particular situation, not knowing your specific property, the short answer is absolutely. If there's roof space or even ground space, there's always the opportunity to expand and in the process help feed power to your neighbors and get some reimbursement for that from the utility. Revision is one of a number of companies that would be happy to put together a design and proposal. So it's the one I happen to know best, but they're on Main Street in Enfield. You can pop into our office or just go to revisionenergy.com or look at any of the number of other great companies in the area.
I had seen an
All right.
article, Dan, that I believe that you penned in the New England Business Review that talked about the size, the difference between when thinking about this work. You were doing some work with you talked about low and moderate income clients, but when you're talking about small buildings versus, big buildings and net metering as it relates to that. So that was,
Yeah.
I thought that was like a super interesting comparison that I hadn't really thought about.
Thank you, Sue. We do have some vagaries, some challenges with our net metering statute, but any home, if you're starting at 34 panels, Robert, you can certainly go quite a bit beyond that before you go into from small to large customer generator and lose a lot of your energy value. So please do take a look. We'd love to help if we can.
Great. What do we got, Chris?
And I think we've got one more short one. And I'm curious to hear your answer to this because I can't think of what a good answer would be. What is the holdup for using the Volkswagen Cash for rapid charges for e-cars? It seems like a no-brainer.
It sure does. I'll try not to get too political. It is the responsibility of the administration, the governor's office, to release their RFP and to do a standard public bidding and then deploy the money. And for whatever reason, it's just they haven't gotten around to it. They did try to release one initially, which unfortunately they didn't take much feedback from experts in the field, and so the RFP they released wasn't crafted in such a way that it was deemed workable, and no EV providers actually responded to that. And then it's been sitting for 5 or 6 months since then. So we are hoping very much that they will go at it again. Take input from experts on crafting a workable RFP and get that money out just as quick as possible, as their neighbors have done.
That's all we had in the Q&A box, but thank you so much, Dan.
Great. Dan, it's always good. It's always good to see you. We're not at a big celebration or at the council table, but it's great to see you. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy life to talk about these, how we can unleash the power of local government, thinking about what we can do, what I could do as a state senator, what we can do as a state to really, comprehensively make a change and turn ourselves. We're heading in that direction. Now is the time. So I guess that hybrid bus we're talking about, we've all got to get on it and in a comprehensive way and move towards not just a strategy, but a series of policies, wrapped in one that takes us to the renewables to incentivizing the renewables, to housing, to transportation, to healthcare, green jobs, a livable wage. I mean, the inequities that we face every day are part, and the fight against climate change is part of the solution. It's a piece, all overlapping. So any final words I've got some of my final words and for our friends, but how about from you?
Well, thank you so much. Again, thank you, Sue, for this conversation and for stepping up to expand your public service beyond the good city of Lebanon to the entire district and the state. And please, to my fellow citizens out there, Election Day is coming up. Be sure to vote, be as involved as you can. And as you noted earlier, let's not let these challenges and crises go to waste. Let's really make the better world that we envision for my 3 little kids and for all of our kids. We can do this more so now than ever before. The science is so clear. The solutions have arrived. We've just got to get on that bus and do it. So thanks again for the time, and wish you the very best in the upcoming primary.
Thanks so much, Dan. I wish you and your family the best. And I'm sure I'll see you out there soon. Have a great night. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank you.
Very good. Let's find the leave button.